The silence on the road was a lie. It screamed in the space between the tires humming on worn asphalt and the oppressive weight of the Georgia humidity. For General Evelyn Reed, the silence was louder than any firefight she had ever commanded. It was the sound of a mission she hadn't been assigned, a promise she'd made to a ghost, and a truth buried somewhere under the blood-red clay of Havenwood County. 4 stars on her shoulder meant nothing out here, tucked away in the anonymous shell of a rented sedan. She wore faded jeans and a simple gray t-shirt, her formidable presence concealed beneath the quiet disguise of an ordinary traveler. But she was not ordinary. And this was no vacation. Her knuckles were white on the steering wheel. She was a hunter, far from the polished halls of the Pentagon, tracking a predator that didn't exist in any official report. Her prey was an absence, a void, left by Sergeant Anya Sharma. Anya. The name was a stone in her gut. A brilliant, fiercely idealistic cryptanalyst Eve had mentored, fast-tracked for a career that should have touched the sky. The official file, thin and dismissive, concluded she had gone AWOL. It suggested a young woman cracking under pressure, abandoning her post, her duty, her country. Eve knew better. Anya wasn't a runner. She was a fighter. She wouldn't break, but she could be broken. Eve's secure phone, a sleek, featureless black slab, remained dark on the passenger seat. Her last communication had been a single, encrypted text hours ago, sent from a burner phone she would soon discard. It confirmed her target, Haven Fuel and Goods, a forgotten outpost on a 2-lane highway that bled into the deep woods. It was the last place Anya Sharma's digital footprint had vanished. Eve was here to find out why. The town of Havenwood appeared slowly, reluctantly, as if rising from a swampy dream. A peeling welcome sign, a church with a leaning steeple, houses with porches that seemed to watch her pass with vacant, judgmental eyes. Secrets clung to the Spanish moss like the humidity, and the quiet felt less like peace and more like a held breath. This was a town that knew how to keep its mouth shut. Eve's job was to make it talk. Miles away, in the driver's seat of a Havenwood Police Department cruiser, Officer Kate Riley tasted ash. It was a phantom taste she'd lived with for 2 years. Ever since the night she'd watched her partner, David, bleed out on a rain-slicked street. Her gaze swept over the sleepy storefronts, but she wasn't seeing them. She was seeing the flashing lights, the glint of something metallic, the chaotic shadow of a figure disappearing into an alley. A young man, black, in a hooded sweatshirt. That was all the report said. That was all anyone ever needed to know. The suspect had been caught, questioned, and released. Lack of evidence, the DA had said. A clever lawyer from Atlanta had painted a picture of a scared kid in the wrong place at the wrong time, a victim of a jumpy cop. The narrative had stuck. David's memory was reduced to a statistic. Another officer lost in the line of duty, his killer walking free. The injustice had hollowed Kate out. Her grief had curdled into a hard, cold knot of certainty that lived in her chest. The system was broken. It was too soft, too slow, too willing to make excuses. All she had left was the badge, the gun, and a fierce, burning conviction to never let it happen again. She saw the world not in shades of gray, but in the stark black and white of an incident report. Threat or non-threat, us or them. Her radio crackled, a dispatcher's voice pulling her from the memory. Unit 3, you have a call from Brenda Miller at the Fuel and Goods. Says she's got a suspicious individual, possibly casing the place. Female, hanging around the north pumps. Kate's hand tightened on the radio. Brenda Miller, Anya Sharma's aunt. The woman had been haunting the station for weeks, her eyes wide with a fear no one else seemed to take seriously. Everyone else had accepted the AWOL story. Everyone but Brenda. 10-4, Kate responded, her voice flat. On my way. Suspicious individual. The words echoed David's last call. It was always something small, something that started with a feeling in your gut, a flicker of movement, a person who just didn't belong. She flipped on the lights, not for urgency, but for effect. She wanted them to see her coming. She wanted them to know that in her town, there was nowhere to hide. As the cruiser ate up the miles, the ghost of her partner sat beside her, his silence a constant damning command. Don't let them get away with it. Eve saw the approaching lights in her rearview mirror long before she heard the siren. It was a lazy, almost arrogant pulse of red and blue, cutting through the twilight. She kept her hands on the wheel, her breathing steady, her training kicking in like a second heartbeat. Observe. Assess. Control the space. She had already parked at the far end of the cracked lot, near the north pumps as instructed, the engine off. The gas station was a study in decay, rusted signs, a single flickering fluorescent light above the door, and the dark, gaping maw of the woods pressing in from behind. Inside, she could see the silhouette of a woman behind the counter. Brenda, Anya's aunt. The intended source of her intel. But the flashing lights meant the plan had just been compromised. The police cruiser pulled in at a sharp angle, blocking her car. A lone officer stepped out, female, white, with a tense, athletic build and a face set in a grim mask of authority. She moved with a purpose that bordered on aggression. Eve felt a familiar prickle of warning on her skin. This wasn't a routine check. This was a confrontation. Eve remained in the car, hands visible on the steering wheel. She watched the officer approach, her eyes cataloging every detail. The way her hand hovered near her sidearm, the slight forward lean of her shoulders, the hard set of her jaw. This officer wasn't here to help. She was here to win. As the officer's shadow fell across her window, Eve prepared herself. She had commanded armies, negotiated with warlords, and stared down threats that could topple nations. But she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that in this forgotten corner of Georgia, in the eyes of this one determined cop, she was about to face one of the most dangerous battles of her life. The chapter wasn't just beginning. The storm had already arrived. From behind the smudged glass of the front counter, Brenda Miller watched the scene unfold, with a heart that beat like a trapped bird. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to hide, but she was frozen in place, a prisoner of her own fear. It wasn't a stranger she saw in the officer's uniform. It was Kate Riley. Kate, who had been the only one to look her in the eye and listen, truly listen, when Brenda first reported Anya missing. While other officers had mumbled platitudes and pointed to the Army's official report, Kate's gaze had held a flicker of shared loss, a silent understanding of what it meant to have a piece of your world ripped away. That flicker of empathy was why Brenda had called her, and her alone. The woman in the rental car was the reason. For weeks, Brenda had felt unseen eyes on her home, on this gas station. Cars with tinted windows would slow as they passed. Late-night phone calls would greet her with dead air. It was a creeping, suffocating paranoia that everyone else dismissed as grief. But Brenda knew it was real. It was connected to Anya. And this woman, with her hardened face and watchful eyes, who moved with the coiled stillness of a predator, fit the profile of the shadows that haunted her. She had described her to Kate as suspicious, a vague, harmless word. But in her mind, the word was dangerous. She hadn't called the police because of the woman's skin color. She had called because, in her terror-stricken heart, she believed this woman was one of the people who had taken her niece. She was trying to protect Anya's memory, to protect herself, by pointing the town's most determined wolf in the direction of a threat. But now, watching Kate's rigid posture and the aggressive angle of the patrol car, a new, colder fear began to seep in. She hadn't sicked a wolf. She had unleashed a fury. Kate Riley approached the sedan, her senses on high alert. The woman inside didn't flinch. She just watched, her dark eyes calm and analytical. It was the kind of unnerving stillness Kate had seen before, the calculated composure of someone who believed they were above the law. It set her teeth on edge. "Ma'am," Kate said, her voice sharp and devoid of warmth. "I'm going to need you to step out of the vehicle." The car door opened smoothly. The woman emerged not with the frantic energy of the guilty, but with a deliberate grace that was even more infuriating. She was tall, lean, and carried herself with an authority that had nothing to do with a uniform. "Good evening, officer," the woman said, her voice a low, steady alto. "Is there a problem?" The calm politeness felt like a mockery. "That's what I'm here to find out," Kate snapped. "We had a call about a suspicious individual. License and registration. The woman nodded slowly, her eyes never leaving Kate's. I'm General Evelyn Reed, U.S. Army, she stated, as if announcing the weather. She reached not for the glove compartment, but for a slim leather wallet in her jacket pocket, her movements economical and precise. I'm afraid the rental agreement is on my device, but I have my personal and military identification right here. She produced a driver's license and a government-issued ID card, the kind with holograms and security features that screamed federal authenticity. Kate took them, her thumb smudging the plastic. The name matched, Evelyn Reed. The military ID was crisp, official, but the rank, general. A bitter laugh almost escaped Kate's lips. General? Out here, in a dusty rental car, wearing jeans and a cheap t-shirt? It was the most absurd, arrogant lie she had ever heard. It was a classic power play, an attempt to intimidate her with a fantasy. David had warned her about this. They'll say anything to get in your head, he'd told her. Stick to the facts. The fact was, this woman was where she shouldn't be, acting in a way that didn't fit. The fact was, Brenda Miller was scared. This is a good fake, Kate said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. She held the military ID between her thumb and forefinger, as if it were contaminated. Really professional. Where'd you get it? Online? General Reed's expression didn't change, but a new intensity sharpened her gaze. Officer, I suggest you run that ID. You'll find it's fully valid. I'm here on sensitive business, and you are currently interfering with it. Sensitive business? Kate echoed, the words tasting like poison. Is that what you call casing a gas station in the middle of nowhere? I was waiting to meet someone. Who? Kate pressed, stepping closer, using her presence to dominate the space. That's classified. The word classified was the final spark on the tinder of Kate's rage. It was the ultimate dismissal, the final confirmation that this woman believed she was untouchable. All the frustration, all the grief for David, all the powerlessness she had felt for 2 years coalesced into a single, decisive action. I've heard enough, Kate said, her voice low and tight. She dropped the IDs onto the hood of the car. You can tell your stories down at the station. Her hand went to the cold steel of the handcuffs on her belt. Place your hands behind your back. Now, General Reed didn't move. She simply stood there, a statue of defiance carved from granite. Officer Riley, she said, reading the name from Kate's uniform, her voice dropping to an icy whisper. I am giving you one last chance to walk away from this. Verify my identity. You are making a mistake that will follow you for the rest of your life. But Kate wasn't listening to the words. She was hearing the echo of David's last breath, seeing the phantom of his killer slipping away into the dark. She was done with chances. She was done with letting them get away. With a swift, practiced movement, she grabbed Eve's arm, twisting it behind her back. The general didn't fight, but her body went rigid with a resistance that was more powerful than any struggle. The first metallic click of the handcuff echoed in the humid air, a sound of absolute finality. The cold metal bit into Evelyn Reed's wrist, a stark, grounding reality. Decades of command, of respect earned on battlefields both foreign and domestic, evaporated in the humid Georgia air. In that moment, she wasn't a general. She was a suspect, a body to be processed, her identity erased by the sheer, unyielding force of one officer's conviction. Kate Riley was efficient, her movements fueled by a righteous anger that left no room for doubt. As she secured the second cuff, she shoved Eve forward, forcing her to brace against the side of the rental car. The push was harder than necessary, a physical exclamation point on her authority. You have the right to remain silent, Kate began, the Miranda warning spilling out in a rote, emotionless stream. Eve tuned it out. Her mind was already 3 steps ahead, calculating, re-strategizing. The mission was compromised. Her anonymity was gone. But the objective remained. Find Anya. Uncover the truth. This arrest wasn't just an obstacle. It was now part of the landscape, a piece of the puzzle she had to solve. As Kate steered her towards the patrol car, Eve's jacket snagged and pulled taut against her shoulder. For a fraction of a second, the lapel of her shirt was exposed. It was a detail so small, so insignificant, it would have been missed by anyone not looking for a miracle. But Brenda Miller was, from her vantage point by the station door, Brenda's world tilted on its axis. Her breath hitched. There, pinned to the collar of the woman's simple gray t-shirt, was a small, delicate silver dragonfly. Its wings were fashioned from filigree, its tiny eyes 2 chips of sapphire. It wasn't just a piece of jewelry. It was Anya's. The memory hit Brenda with the force of a physical blow. The day Anya had left for basic training, her face a mixture of fierce pride and nervous excitement. Brenda had pressed the pin into her hand. "So you'll always have something to help you fly home," she'd whispered. Anya had promised to keep it with her always, a secret talisman against fear and loneliness. And now it was here, pinned to the shirt of the woman being forced into the back of a police car. The realization was a punch to the gut, sucking the air from her lungs. This woman wasn't a threat. She wasn't one of them. The fear that had coiled in Brenda's stomach for weeks was instantly replaced by a new, far more sickening horror. What have I done? This woman, this general, wasn't here to harm Anya's memory. She was here because of it. She was here to help. And Brenda had just handed her over to the one person in town too blinded by her own pain to see the truth. The Havenwood police station was a small brick building that smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant. Eve was led through a short hallway and into a booking room. The air was thick with a lazy indifference. Chief Dale Hardwick sat behind a large metal desk, a bear of a man with a folksy, disarming smile that didn't reach his cold, calculating eyes. He listened to Kate's brief, clipped report, his gaze lingering on Eve, who stood silent and impassive in the doorway. "Well now, sounds like you had your hands full, Riley," Hardwick said, his voice a low, rumbling drawl. He picked up Eve's military ID from the corner of his desk where Kate had tossed it. He glanced at it, then at Eve, and a slow, knowing smirk spread across his face. "A general, huh? In my town? Lord have mercy. He didn't check a database. He didn't make a phone call. He simply slid the ID back onto the desk and leaned back in his chair, folding his hands over his ample stomach. "Good work," he said, his eyes fixed on Kate. "We can't have people impersonating military personnel. It's a federal offense. Let's put her in holding cell 2. Give her some time to think about her story." The validation from her superior officer was a small, satisfying balm on Kate's raw nerves. "See?" she thought. A defiant voice in her head. It wasn't just me. The chief saw it too. She had done the right thing. Eve said nothing. She watched the exchange between the 2 officers, her mind a whirring supercomputer of analysis. Hardwick's dismissal wasn't just lazy police work. It was deliberate. He wanted her to be a nobody. He wanted her locked away, out of sight. The question was, why? As Kate led her toward the holding cells, the station's front door burst open. Brenda Miller stood there, her face pale, her eyes wide with panic. "Chief, Officer Riley," she gasped, rushing forward. "You don't understand. That woman, the pin on her shirt. It was my Anya's." Kate stopped, turning to face Brenda with an exhausted sigh. "Brenda, please, you're not thinking clearly. Go home. We've got this under control." "No," Brenda insisted, her voice trembling but gaining strength. "You've got to listen to me. I gave her that pin. It means she's here to help. It has to." Chief Hardwick rose slowly from his desk, his folksy smile gone, replaced by a mask of paternalistic concern. "Now, Brenda," he said, his voice soft but firm, "we all know how much you're hurting, but you're letting your grief get the better of you. Officer Riley here has apprehended a woman making false claims. That's all this is. Why don't you let us handle our business?" He placed a heavy hand on Kate's shoulder, a gesture of solidarity that was also a clear command. "Dismiss her." Kate looked from Brenda's desperate face to her chief's reassuring one. Her loyalty, her training, her entire worldview was anchored to the man standing beside her, the embodiment of the thin blue line. Brenda was a civilian, overwrought and emotional. The chief was the law. "Brenda, go home," Kate repeated, her voice hardened with finality. She turned away, leaving no room for argument, and continued to escort Eve down the hall. The heavy steel door of the holding cell clanged shut, the sound echoing the closing of Brenda's heart. She stared down the empty corridor, the chief's patronizing smile burning in her memory. He wasn't trying to protect the town. He was hiding something. And she had just helped him lock away the one person who might have been able to find it. Despair washed over her as she watched the door to the holding cells swing closed. She was alone again, but this time, the silence was filled with the deafening sound of her own catastrophic mistake. 2,000 miles away, in a secure, windowless room bathed in the cool blue light of monitor screens, Colonel Marcus Vance stared at a blinking red icon on a map of the United States. The icon pulsed over Havenwood, Georgia, a place he'd never heard of until 30 minutes ago. It was a digital heartbeat signifying a catastrophic failure. General Evelyn Reed was dark. Her check-in, scheduled for 2,100 hours, had come and gone. The emergency distress protocol, a series of coded, nonverbal signals, had remained unanswered. Eve, a woman whose discipline was forged in the crucible of special operations, did not miss check-ins. She did not go dark. Panic was a luxury Marcus couldn't afford. As the designated point of contact for Eve's off-the-books investigation, he was the only one in the entire Department of Defense who knew precisely where she was and why she was there. He couldn't dispatch a quick reaction force. He couldn't call in the cavalry with black SUVs and flashing lights. To do so would be to detonate a political landmine, exposing a four-star general operating outside her official capacity, investigating a case the Army had already closed. It would end Eve's career, discredit her findings, and bury the truth about Anya Sharma forever. He had to move like a surgeon, not a sledgehammer. His fingers flew across a keyboard, his mind racing through protocols and contingencies. His first call wasn't to a general or an admiral, but to a man whose name didn't appear on any official Pentagon roster. Elias Thorne, a senior agent with the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. They had served together in Afghanistan a lifetime ago and had forged a bond of trust in dust and chaos. It was a trust Marcus was now forced to leverage. Elias, Marcus said when the encrypted call connected, his voice calm and measured. I need a favor, a delicate one. He laid out the situation with careful, deliberate ambiguity. A highly decorated federal employee, a woman of significant importance to national security, was traveling incognito in rural Georgia. Her last known location was Havenwood. She was now unresponsive. He couldn't provide her name or rank over the line, but he gave Elias her date of birth and the license plate of her rental car. I'm not asking you to send a SWAT team, Marcus clarified. I need a quiet inquiry, a welfare check, officially. I need to know if she's in local custody, and if so, on what grounds. The key here is discretion. Elias. We cannot spook the locals. Elias, a man accustomed to the strange contours of back-channel requests, was silent for a moment. National security importance in Havenwood? He finally asked, a note of professional skepticism in his voice. What's in Havenwood besides pine trees and speed traps? That's what I'm hoping you can help me find out, Marcus replied, letting the gravity of his tone fill the silence. Just find her. Inside holding cell 2, the air was stale with the ghosts of past occupants. Eve sat on the edge of a thin, vinyl-covered cot, the chill of the concrete floor seeping into her bones. She wasn't afraid. She was focused. The cell wasn't a prison. It was a vantage point. From her seat, she had a clear line of sight through the barred door to the main booking area. She listened, not just to the words being spoken, but to the rhythm of the station. She noted the easy familiarity between the two night shift deputies, a stark contrast to the way they stiffened and fell silent whenever Chief Hardwick walked by. They feared him. It was a subtle but undeniable current of intimidation that ran through the entire building. Hardwick himself was a fascinating study in deception. He projected an image of a bumbling, small-town lawman, but his eyes were sharp, constantly scanning, assessing. He made 2 phone calls on his personal cell, his voice dropping to a low murmur, his back turned to the room. He wasn't calling his wife. He was reporting in. Eve's mind connected the dots. Anya, a brilliant cryptanalyst, goes missing. The Army rules at AWOL, closing the case with suspicious speed. Eve comes to town to investigate quietly, and within an hour, she's arrested on a flimsy pretext by a volatile officer, and her identity is deliberately ignored by the chief of police. This wasn't a case of a missing person being overlooked. This was an active cover-up. Anya hadn't just disappeared. She had stumbled onto something so dangerous that the highest level of local law enforcement was willing to risk a federal incident to keep it buried. The arrest wasn't a random act of prejudice. It was a calculated move to neutralize a threat. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sharp, insistent ring of the main desk phone. It was a different sound from the casual calls that had come in earlier. This one had an edge of authority. The deputy who answered listened for a moment, his face growing pale. Yes, sir. He's right here. He held the phone out to Hardwick, his hand trembling slightly. It's the GBI. For you. Eve watched as Hardwick took the receiver. The folksy smile was gone, replaced by a tense, rigid posture. He turned his back again, but she could see the muscles in his neck bunching. His half of the conversation was short, clipped, consisting mostly of "yes, sir," and "I understand." When he hung up, he stood motionless for a full 10 seconds. The lazy confidence had evaporated, leaving behind the cold, hard glint of a cornered animal. He walked over to the key box on the wall, his movements stiff and jerky. He unlocked it, grabbed a key, and strode toward the holding cells. His face, a thundercloud of fury and frustration. He wasn't looking at Eve. He was looking through her, his mind clearly racing, trying to figure out how his carefully controlled world had just been blown apart by a single phone call from the state capitol. He had tried to make her a ghost, but he had just found out she had a voice, and it had reached much further than he ever anticipated. The lock on the cell door turned with a heavy final thud. Chief Hardwick stood in the opening, his face a mask of forced neutrality, but his eyes burned with a cold, resentful fire. He didn't speak. He simply jerked his head toward the exit, a silent, grudging order. Eve rose from the cot, her movements fluid and deliberate. As she walked past him, their eyes met. In that brief, charged moment, an unspoken declaration of war passed between them. He knew she was more than she appeared, and she knew he was guilty. In the booking area, Kate Riley was waiting. Her face was pale, a mixture of confusion, humiliation, and a dawning, sickening sense of dread. She avoided Eve's gaze, her attention fixed on the scuffed linoleum floor. The confident fury that had driven her just hours ago had crumbled, leaving behind a brittle, uncertain shell. She had followed orders. She had trusted her gut. And somewhere, she had made a catastrophic error in judgment, though she couldn't yet comprehend its scale. No apology was offered. Eve's wallet and IDs were placed on the counter. The silence in the room was thick enough to choke on. Eve didn't head for the exit. Instead, her first move was to turn toward the lone figure sitting on a hard plastic chair in the waiting area, Brenda Miller. She looked up as Eve approached, her eyes red-rimmed and filled with a desperate, pleading hope. "The dragonfly pin," Eve said, her voice low and soft, "meant only for Brenda. Where did you get it?" I gave it to her," Brenda whispered, tears welling. "To Anya. The day she left." Eve nodded slowly. "I found it in her personal effects, in a storage unit she kept off base. It was the only thing that felt personal. I brought it with me. I thought it might mean something to her family." The simple, quiet truth of it broke through Brenda's remaining defenses. This woman, this powerful, intimidating general, had carried a piece of Anya with her. She hadn't come here as a soldier or an investigator. She had come as someone who cared. "Come with me," Eve said gently. It wasn't an order, but an invitation. A few minutes later, they were seated at a small, wobbly table in Brenda's cramped but tidy kitchen. A pot of tea sat between them, untouched and growing cold. Brenda, her voice trembling at first, then gaining strength, told Eve everything. She spoke of Anya's last few phone calls, the fear she'd tried to hide, her vague references to stumbling onto something wrong and bigger than her in Havenwood while on leave. She described the strange cars, the unnerving silence from the authorities, the suffocating feeling of being watched. In return, Eve laid out her own cards. She explained her connection to Anya, her disbelief at the official AWOL story, and her decision to conduct a covert, unsanctioned inquiry. The system failed her, Brenda, Eve stated, her voice hard as steel. I came here to find out why. Your call to the police tonight and Chief Hardwick's reaction, it tells me I'm in the right place. They were two women from vastly different worlds, united by their shared love for Anya and a growing conviction that her disappearance was not a tragedy, but a crime. There was one more piece to the puzzle. One more person they needed. I have to talk to her, Eve said, her gaze firm. Officer Riley. They found Kate at a 24-hour diner on the edge of town, a lonely figure nursing a cup of coffee at the counter. The place smelled of grease and regret. When Eve and Brenda slid into the booth behind her, she flinched, but didn't turn around. If you're here to file a complaint, just do it, Kate said, her voice flat, addressing the reflections in the dark window. I'll take what's coming to me. That's not why we're here, Eve said, her tone even and non-accusatory. She waited until Kate, slowly, reluctantly, turned to face them. This was the critical moment. Eve knew that anger and accusations would only harden Kate's defenses. She had to be disarmed, not defeated. You're a good cop, Officer Riley, Eve began, and the unexpected words made Kate blink. You saw a situation you believed was a threat, and you acted. Your tactics were aggressive. Your assumptions were wrong. But your intent was to protect someone you thought was in danger. I understand that. She let that sink in before continuing. But you were played. Both of us were. Chief Hardwick didn't want my identity verified. He wanted me silenced. He saw Brenda's fear and your conviction, and he used them. He used you. Eve leaned forward slightly. You lost a partner. I can see it in your eyes. You believe the system failed him. What if I told you the system in this town is not just broken, but corrupt? What if I told you the man you trust, your chief, is the one pulling the strings? She laid out the facts with cold, irrefutable logic. Hardwick's deliberate refusal to verify her ID, his eagerness to lock her away without cause, his panicked reaction to the GBI's call. This isn't about my arrest anymore, Eve concluded. This is about Anya Sharma. And maybe, just maybe, it's connected to what happened to your partner. Hardwick is hiding something. You know this town. You know the players. You have access. I have a mission. She looked Kate directly in the eye, her voice dropping to a challenge. The question is, where does your loyalty lie? With the badge you wear, or with the man who is using it to cover his crimes? Kate stared at her, her face a battlefield of warring emotions. The foundations of her world, her trust in her superior, her belief in the chain of command, her black and white view of justice were crumbling. For 2 years, she had been hunting a ghost, blaming a faceless them. But Eve was offering her a real, tangible target. A monster, wearing a familiar uniform. It was a terrifying leap of faith, a betrayal of everything she had been trained to uphold. But as she looked at Brenda's tear-streaked, hopeful face, and then at the general's unyielding gaze, she felt the first flicker of a different kind of duty. A duty to the truth. She pushed her coffee cup away, the ceramics scraping against the formica. What do you need me to do? Kate asked, her voice barely a whisper. The alliance, as fragile and unlikely as a flower growing through concrete, had been formed. The kitchen in Brenda's small house became their war room. The air, once heavy with grief, now crackled with a tense, nervous energy. A map of Havenwood County was spread across the table, a landscape of secrets they now had to navigate. They were a strange and desperate trio. The general, with her mind for strategy. The cop, with her insider's key to a locked system. And the aunt, whose love for her niece had become an unquenchable fire for justice. Their first move was digital. Under the cloak of pre-dawn darkness, Kate sat at her personal laptop, her fingers flying across the keyboard with a mix of practiced skill and newfound trepidation. Using a backdoor access code she'd been given for emergencies, she slipped past the Havenwood PD's firewall. What she found confirmed Eve's suspicions and sent a chill down her spine. He wiped it, Kate whispered, her face illuminated by the screen's glow. The entire incident report from your arrest. It's gone. Not just deleted, but scrubbed from the server backup. And Anya's missing person file, it's been edited. Key witness statements are missing. The timeline of her last known whereabouts has been altered to make it look like she left town willingly. It was the digital equivalent of burying a body. Chief Hardwick wasn't just being negligent, he was actively tampering with federal evidence. For Kate, this was the final damning proof. Her loyalty to the badge now meant loyalty to the truth, not the man who was desecrating it. While Kate mined the digital world, Brenda worked the human network. She made quiet phone calls to Anya's high school friends, the people who knew the girl, not the soldier. Her gentle, sorrowful questions unlocked doors that official inquiries never could. A picture began to emerge of Anya's last visit home. She'd been jumpy, secretive. One friend recalled a hushed, frantic conversation where Anya mentioned being scared. She'd seen something she wasn't supposed to see. Something involving the old, defunct logging company on the edge of the state forest. She called it a big contract, the friend recounted to Brenda. But she said it with this tremor in her voice. She said the trucks were running at all hours of the night, but the mill has been shut down for years. Eve listened, processing the fragments of information, arranging them like pieces on a chessboard. A corrupt police chief, altered records, a scared cryptanalyst, and a phantom logging operation. It wasn't a random crime. It was an enterprise. He's using the company as a front, Eve declared, her finger tracing a route on the map from the logging mill to the interstate. The trucks provide the perfect cover for moving illicit goods. They're a common sight, part of the local scenery. No one would look twice. But what were they moving? Drugs? Weapons? The answer, when it came, was far more monstrous. Kate, digging deeper into the department's archives, cross-referenced the logging company's registered owners with a list of cold cases. She found a faint, tenuous link. 2 years ago, on the same night her partner David was killed, another officer had reported a suspicious logging truck near the scene. The report was buried, marked unsubstantiated by none other than Chief Hardwick himself. A new, horrifying theory began to form in Eve's mind. She remembered a briefing from years ago, a red-flagged intelligence report about emerging domestic trafficking networks using rural transportation routes. It's not goods, Eve said, her voice grim. It's people. Anya wasn't a cryptanalyst for nothing. She was trained to see patterns, to recognize anomalies. She must have seen something, looked into it, and realized what was happening. Hardwick isn't just a corrupt cop. He's a trafficker. The revelation landed in the room with the weight of a body bag. The death of Kate's partner was no longer a random act of violence. It was a targeted assassination to silence a witness. Anya's disappearance was the same. They had both gotten too close to the viper's nest. There was only one way to be sure. They had to get inside the logging company's office. They needed proof ledgers, manifests, anything that would turn their theory into an indictment. That night, under the sliver of a new moon, the three women moved through the shadows toward the derelict mill. The place was a graveyard of industry, silent and imposing. Kate, using a set of lockpicks she forgot to turn in from a past training exercise, worked the front office door. The click of the lock opening was deafening in the silence. Inside, the office was thick with the smell of dust and decay. A single metal desk and a hulking filing cabinet were the only furniture. Eve, using a penlight, scanned the room with a soldier's practiced eye while Brenda stood watch at the window. Kate went straight for the cabinet. It was locked. "Stand back," Eve commanded. Without hesitation, she took a heavy-duty stapler from the desk and with a single, perfectly placed blow, smashed the lock. They pulled open the drawers. They were filled with dusty, mundane trucking logs. For a heart-stopping moment, they thought they had been wrong. Then, in the back of the bottom drawer, Kate's fingers brushed against a different kind of book. A small, black, hard-bound ledger. She opened it. The pages weren't filled with timber volumes or mileage. They were filled with names. Dozens of them, mostly female, listed next to dates and destinations. And near the end, on a page dated 3 weeks ago, was a new entry, written in Hardwick's familiar, sloping handwriting. Anya is lost cargo. Final disposition. They'd found it. The smoking gun. Brenda, still at the window, let out a sharp, choked gasp. Car. Even Kate looked up. Two beams of light cut through the darkness, sweeping across the yard and pinning the office in their glare. The engine cut, and the sudden silence was more terrifying than any sound. They weren't just discovered. They had walked right into a trap. The glare of the headlights flooded the dusty office, silhouetting them against the back wall. There was no time for shock, no space for fear. Eve's command instincts took over, sharp and instantaneous. Kate, the ledger. Secure it, she ordered, her voice a low, urgent whisper. Brenda, away from the window. Desk for cover. Now. The women moved, their adrenaline-fueled actions a stark contrast to the methodical calm in Eve's voice. Kate shoved the black book into the inside pocket of her jacket, her hand protectively covering it. Brenda scrambled behind the heavy steel desk, her heart hammering against her ribs. Outside, two car doors slammed shut. Heavy footsteps crunched on the gravel, slow and deliberate. They were being corralled. He knew, Kate breathed, her eyes wide as she peered over the edge of a grimy window. Hardwick knew we'd come here. He didn't know, Eve corrected, her eyes darting around the room, assessing every shadow, every potential weapon, every exit. He anticipated. He left a trail for us to follow, expecting us to lead him to whatever proof we found. The front door of the office creaked open. Chief Dale Hardwick filled the doorway, a large caliber revolver held loosely in his hand. He wasn't alone. Flanking him was one of his deputies, a young, nervous-looking man named Peters, his own weapon drawn but held with far less confidence. Well, ladies, Hardwick drawled, the folksy charm now curdled into a venomous sneer. Looks like you found something that doesn't belong to you. I'm going to need you to hand that book over. Eve stepped forward, placing herself between Hardwick and the others. It's over, Dale. You're a trafficker. You murdered a United States Army soldier. There's no walking away from this. Hardwick chuckled, a low, ugly sound. You're right. There's no walking away. Not for you. He gestured with his gun. The official story will be a tragedy. A decorated but unstable general, aided by a disgraced cop and a grieving aunt, broke into private property. When confronted, they opened fire. I, of course, had no choice but to defend myself. A real shame. He was planning to execute them, right here, right now, and bury the truth under 3 more bodies. This was the tipping point. The moment the battle shifted from a war of wits to a fight for survival. As Hardwick took a step into the room, Eve moved. It wasn't a charge. It was an explosion of controlled violence. She kicked the leg of a rickety wooden chair, sending it skittering across the floor directly into Deputy Peters' shins. The young officer stumbled, his concentration breaking for a crucial half-second. That was all Kate needed. Dispatch. This is Unit 3, she yelled into the police radio clipped to her shoulder. Her voice clear and strong. Shots fired at the old logging mill. Officer needs assistance. Chief Hardwick is compromised. I repeat, Hardwick is compromised. But she didn't stop there. Before Hardwick could react, her other hand subtly activated her phone. This is a recording, she announced, her voice ringing with cold fury. From her phone's speaker, Hardwick's own voice filled the small office. A tinny ghost of his earlier threat. A real shame. No choice but to defend myself. Hardwick's face contorted with rage. The trap had been turned back on him. He lunged not at Eve, but at Kate, the source of his public humiliation. It was a fatal mistake. Eve moved in, her movements a blur of combat efficiency. She didn't have a weapon, so she became one. Her hand chopped down on Hardwick's wrist, sending his revolver clattering to the floor. Her other hand slammed into his throat, a precise, debilitating blow that made him gag and stumble backward. Meanwhile, Brenda, who had been a specter of fear just days ago, acted on pure, primal instinct. As the dazed Deputy Peters tried to regain his footing, she erupted from behind the desk, wielding a heavy, rusted fire extinguisher like a battering ram. She swung it with all her might, catching the deputy squarely in the chest. He went down with a grunt, the wind knocked out of him. The fight was short, brutal, and decisive. Eve had Hardwick pinned against the wall, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Kate had kicked his gun out of reach and now stood over the winded deputy, her own service weapon drawn and steady. The wail of approaching sirens grew from a distant cry to a deafening roar. Red and blue lights pulsed through the trees, painting the chaotic scene in frantic, strobing colors. The other officers of the Havenwood PD were coming, drawn by Kate's call and the damning evidence of their chief's own words broadcast over the open channel. When the first deputies burst through the door, they found a scene of stunning reversal. Their formidable chief was subdued, gasping for air under the steely control of the woman he had jailed. His accomplice was on the floor, groaning, and Officer Kate Riley, the pariah, the loose cannon, stood tall, the black ledger clutched in one hand and her gun in the other, no longer a disgraced cop, but the unassailable voice of the law. The sun was beginning to rise, its first pale rays filtering through the dusty windows. The long night of Havenwood was finally over. The reckoning had come not with a whisper, but with the righteous fury of 3 women who had refused to be silenced. The aftermath was a quiet storm. Within hours, Havenwood was no longer an isolated county, but the epicenter of a sprawling federal investigation. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation, followed closely by the FBI, descended on the town like a flood, washing away the years of rot that had festered beneath the surface. The Black Ledger was the key. It unlocked a Pandora's box of corruption, leading investigators to a network that stretched across 3 states. Hardwick, stripped of his badge and his power, began to sing, hoping to trade the names of bigger fish for a lesser sentence. His confession led them to a shallow, unmarked grave deep in the state forest. Anya Sharma had come home. Her funeral was held on a crisp autumn day. The small-town cemetery was filled not just with locals, but with soldiers in their dress uniforms. A stoic honor guard sent by a grateful nation. An American flag was folded with reverent precision and presented to Brenda. Eve stood beside her, not as a general, but as a friend, a silent pillar of support. In the weeks that followed, the town of Havenwood began the slow, painful process of healing. The story of what had happened, the real story, spread from neighbor to neighbor. It was a tale of corruption and murder, but also one of unexpected heroism. Kate Riley faced an internal affairs review board. She recounted her actions, starting with the wrongful arrest of General Reed, and made no excuses. "I failed my duty that night," she told them, her voice clear and steady. "I saw a suspect, not a person. But I hope my actions since have shown I'm willing to do what it takes to earn back the trust I broke." Her honesty, combined with a glowing letter of commendation from General Evelyn Reed, saved her career. She was suspended, ordered to attend counseling, and tasked with rebuilding community relations. It was a beginning, not an end. She and Brenda started a local youth outreach program, a small memorial in Anya's memory. Eve, for her part, held a single press conference on the steps of the Havenwood County Courthouse. She spoke not of her arrest, but of the real hero. "Sergeant Anya Sharma was one of the finest soldiers I have ever known," Eve said, her voice echoing in the quiet square. "She was not a victim. She was a warrior. She saw an injustice in her own hometown, and she did not look away. She fought for the faceless and the voiceless, and she made the ultimate sacrifice. Let her not be remembered for how she died, but for the courage with which she lived." Months later, Eve returned to Havenwood. She found Kate and Brenda at the cemetery, tending to the small garden they had planted around Anya's headstone. The 3 of them stood there in the soft, late afternoon light, the silence between them, comfortable and profound. They were no longer the general, the cop, and the aunt. They were Eve, Kate, and Brenda, 3 women bound by a shared loss and a shared victory. Looking out over the rolling Georgia hills, Eve knew the world was still full of shadows. But here, in this small town, they had lit a candle. In the ashes of tragedy, they had found the strength to build something new. It wasn't a perfect ending, but it was a real one. It was a dawn.